If you've ever put together a major report or a big piece of content, you know how much time and effort goes into it. But the real question is, what happens after it's published? Because for most teams, it gets promoted for a few weeks and then fades out into the background. In this video, I sat down with Alicia Esposito from Future Commerce to talk about a different approach. How their team took a single research report and turned it into an entire content ecosystem that churned out content for over 6 months. We're talking a full podcast season, video content, blog posts, and a steady stream of social clips, all built around one central narrative. And more importantly, how you can do the same thing to get more mileage out of the work that you're already doing. Let's dive in. Alicia, thanks so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Of course. You and I go way back. We're longtime friends, longtime colleagues. A lot of history there. I know who you are. I know what makes you so special. But why don't for the audience, why don't you give us an idea of, what you do, what your role is at Future Commerce, what Future Commerce does, and what your focus is there.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, I'm a journalist by trade. So studied journalism, wanted to be a journalist, and got into the wild world of B2B publishing. Spent 13 years or so covering retail for Retail Touchpoints, leading content strategy for Content for Demand, which was a sister brand to Retail Touchpoints, and really trying to understand the new storytelling tools, vehicles, and methods that were really driving B2B conversations, engagement, trust building, etc. So I came over to Future Commerce about almost a year ago at this point, and now I'm the head of content and media strategy. Insights is a big part of that because we are a new media company that really digs into research, reporting, and events for retail and e-com leaders. We're a small but mighty team, and that's what makes it so fun because I can do a little bit of everything, and it allows us to test new formats, test new technology, new apps. And really our goal is to cover the intersection of culture and commerce. So while we cover the news and what's happening at the industry level, we like to go a little bit deeper, go into the cultural nuances, the philosophy, the psychology of what we buy, why we buy, and how we buy.
Yeah, that's awesome. And your background in journalism really supports this. As long as I've known you, you've been a passionate storyteller with everything that you've done. And Future Commerce is such a good fit because they have always been very good storytellers. What you guys do is really, captures the heart of the story, What I'd love to talk to you about today is last summer, you guys had launched it's the New Modes Report. And this was a really interesting campaign because it wasn't just this report. We see so many times special reports are published, they're put out, they're marketed, and sort of that's the end of it, right? But what you guys did was really interesting. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the strategy behind that? How did you see this as an opportunity to fill out the rest of your content calendar with content derived from this one report that was published over the summer?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always been a huge believer in repurposing, reimagining your content, especially data, because it is so rich. It lends itself well to so many different contexts, and you can use it to validate a story. You can use it to enhance a story. You can use it to challenge, the status quo statement or belief that so many people in your industry are claiming, right? So going into this process, we knew we wanted it to be valuable for us. We wanted to be able to call back this research in our editorial, but we also wanted to make it meaningful for our friends at Commerce as well, because they're creating content too. So we knew right out the gate, we wanted to start to incorporate this into our editorial pillars. There are different themes we plan to cover each quarter, and we had quite a few stories about our evolving relationship with AI. So there was a lot of rich data we could fold in there. but also the changing influence of social platforms, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube.
Yeah.
We saw a really interesting shift in consumers embracing more entertainment driven modes of content consumption versus the scroll heavy, like solely influencer led
Yeah.
content. So there were some interesting dynamics we wanted to call out that align with our culture and commerce manifesto, so to speak. So we knew there were some editorial threads we wanted to pull in our essays and in our articles, but we have a YouTube channel. We knew right off the bat we wanted to develop content to serve that. And part of our partnership with Commerce, we had a separate agreement to do a Decoded series. So Decoded is our podcast property that allows us to uncover the more abstract concepts happening in our industry, emerging tech, new sectors of exploration that, you see a lot of noise about, but you're like, wait, how do I even handle this? How do I even address this as a business leader? Hence the name Decoded. So it's a 5-episode arc. We bring in experts. We have someone from our lead sponsor co-hosting with us. And we thought, what better way to extend the value and impact of the data than to develop a whole season around the key themes, the key ahas that came out of this research. And it really allowed us to take our data as a starting point, but go a few layers deeper into the psychology, the implications of what we found in the research. And in one case, we even brought in a subject matter expert from another consulting and research firm, CINT, who did her own research, Melissa Minko, and it turned into a whole data-led conversation of like, here's what we found, what did you find? And really looking at that synthesis and what was similar, where were there gaps, and like, what does it all mean? And it actually turned into a really meaningful series because we didn't just have content from the data then, we had content from all of those podcast episodes.
Yeah.
So we were able to slice and dice them for social and all that good stuff.
So the report was published. The content and the data from the report then fed into the Decoded series, a full season. And then that fed your video and social channels with clips from the podcast conversations that you were having on the show.
That's correct. And honestly, we're still pulling in content from new modes as we see fit, whether to, support some of our statements or to call out the evolution of certain trends. So for instance, we've been looking at cultural changes around TikTok. Like, do people still trust TikTok? Are people engaging to the level that they once were? So anytime we make these forward-looking predictions or provide even timely analysis, we like to call back to data to support our claims whenever possible. So it's always nice that it's data that we collected because we know it inside and outside.
It's also fun to see how that changes over time too. I know that when we work with some clients, we have podcasts that are data focused and they talk about trends and things that are happening at a given time. And then it's always fun the next year to kind of revisit that and take a look at how has that changed over the course of a year and have a conversation around there. So that's awesome. We talked, you gave us a really great rundown of the report itself. So my next question was going to be surrounding the report. I think we can just skip to the campaign itself because I guess my question is, this was a really robust ecosystem that you built of content. And when you were publishing the report, or even when you were in the planning of the report, was this something that was planned ahead of time? Did you think that once the report is published, we're going to feed that data into a podcast series, and then that podcast series will feed our YouTube channel or whatever it may be? Or was that something that as you sort of went along, you started to see the opportunities and jumped at those opportunities?
Great question. So anytime we do a Decoded series, we do have a committed content calendar where we say we're going to dedicate X number of weeks for promoting the season. It's typically like I mentioned, 5-episode arc. So most of our partners like to do 1 episode a week. So that's a little more than a month that we have built in, basically, because every week you're promoting a new episode, right? So we'll say, oh, we'll have email ads, through our newsletter committed to the season for X amount of time. We need social to be the ripple effect of that within the core campaign period. But of course, we do want some leverage after that to, make sure people recall it. If they missed it the first time, make sure they go back. Of course, there's always the whole binge the whole season hook that some people, oddly enough, once they engage with us, they do like to go back in the archive, which I know you and I have spoken about quite a bit. So we always like to tap into that. So Decoded and social, YouTube, like that kind of trifecta, it has always been in place for us. But the connection between the research and the Decoded season was not established. So initially there were meant to be 2 separate initiatives. And then they were trying to figure out positioning and who to bring in. And we were midstream with the research. We saw all of the great findings. And we just kind of had the aha moment on the call with our partners. And we started to realize there was so much narrative opportunity there, both for us at Future Commerce, but then also for our friends at Commerce too, because they have great subject matter experts, great client examples, and of course their own great point of view of how they're serving the market too.
For sure. And that actually segues nicely into the podcast. We could start talking more about that because, you have a research report, right? Data heavy. How do you go about now? First of all, I should backtrack and I should say that I think it's a really cool story of how you were able to see the through lines. You were able to kind of see the opportunity for this content and jumped at it, right? So, and it turned into something much bigger than it was supposed to be, which is great. So I guess on the podcast end of things, you have this report. How do you go about translating your findings in a written report into an entire season, episode to episode? How do you create the podcast content from a data heavy report like this? It's not as easy as it would sound. So I'd love to learn a little bit about how you guys went about creatively crafting episodes around this research.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it all starts with the research design itself. We created questions, one, to make sure they laddered back to what could likely get us some earned media coverage. We wanted to make sure it was relevant and high impact. And 2, we try to structure the questions in the way that they followed a very fluid journey or hierarchy of thinking based on the core sectors or capabilities that we knew, Commerce wanted to address as well. So there are kind of mutually beneficial things that we had to kind of tick off as we were designing the survey. So ultimately it allowed us to, 1, revisit the marketing side of things. So how do you engage with marketing? What are your expectations for personalization? 2, we knew we wanted a section just on AI. So that right in and of itself is its own episode, right? Because there are so many unanswered questions and complexities about how consumers use AI and what does it mean from a commerce stack, standpoint? What does it mean for the people that are doing the work and creating these experiences? And then 3, we have the forward looking lens, right? This is what consumers are saying now. So what does it mean for the future of retail and how people plan to shop in the future? And then we actually had a really fantastic underlying finding this year that kind of built upon the omnimodal story quite a bit. And one of the findings essentially indicated that nearly half of our respondents said to us that they are in some capacity always thinking about what they're going to shop next. They have a mental checklist of things that they want to buy, need to buy, are thinking about buying, but need to look into it a little bit more. And we we kind of tapped into this idea of perpetual commerce, that shopping isn't necessarily something we do anymore, but it's something we are. It's part of our identity because we are surrounded by commerce everywhere we go, whether it's YouTube and we're just looking to learn how to, fix our sink, right? We're being served ads, we're being served relevant products. Whether it's gaming, now that's becoming a monetization channel. So that is a very philosophical point, and there are a lot of layers there. So we actually kicked off the season by bringing in a consumer behavioralist, Ken Hughes, who does his own writing and he does his own research. And that was an opportunity for us to kind of level set the entire season around this very idea of perpetual commerce and how AI, personalization, marketing, customer experience, even channel mix all kind of come together to serve the consumer in this like really critical moment in their relationship with brands, retailers, and commerce itself.
That's amazing. So it sounds to me like the way you approached the podcast series was taking a look at the season as its own story. And then each episode was broken up into chapters, essentially, of that story, starting with that first episode, which sort of lays the groundwork for the entire thing. And then you're taking and you had mentioned that in the report, you've already structured the report to be this way. So you're literally just taking these key segments, these key pillars from the report and plugging them into your episode chapters over the course of this series. Would you say that's a good analysis of what you guys did?
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, there were some questions that we received data for that when we went into the analysis period, we were just like, nah, there's not really a there. You know what I mean? Like we had to include some questions around, why do you prefer to shop online? Why do you prefer to shop in store? Like just to kind of benchmark ourselves of like what we were seeing and hearing in the industry. But when push comes to shove, when we're developing a podcast series, a data report, we don't want to repeat the same stuff that people already know. Like it's status quo information, right? So we kind of tabled that stuff. We really wanted to curate the best of the insights and the aha moments that really made us pause, as we were going through it to determine like what makes the most sense, what's the most compelling narrative that we can weave, and most of all, who can we find and bring in to enhance that story as well. And the one piece that I forgot to mention about the campaign itself is we also had a lot of really great demographic cross tabulation. So breaking down findings by Gen Z, Millennial, Gen X, Boomer, that added a layer of context and nuance, I would say, to some of the findings, because we were able to understand like, okay, big picture, these are the top channels for the buyer's journey, right? Discovery, product comparison, purchase. But when you break it down by age, it's all over the map.
Oh, I'm
it's
sure.
like, boomers are going to Amazon at discovery because they tend to spearfish. They tend to know right away what they're looking for. So they don't want to do all of that other stuff.
Yeah.
They don't see Facebook as commerce. They just see it as Facebook, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Gen Z, they go to Instagram because they want to be inspired. They want to research aesthetics. They want to look at celebrity gossip. And it's just part of their natural media consumption flow, so to speak. And commerce is embedded into that. And they know that. They're pretty self-aware. They understand the role that commerce plays in their identity.
So you mentioned finding the right people to support the narrative episode to episode, right? So how did you go about when you're structuring these episodes, on a fundamental level? How did you figure out who would be the right fit for a given topic? Were there any episodes where maybe there wasn't a guest or there wasn't a research expert on and it was just you guys sort of telling the story? How did you go about formatting these episodes, for each of them?
Yeah, well, anytime there was a big idea or we really wanted to drive urgency around a particular topic. So AI being, the cream of the crop, right?
Yep.
Because there were so many big questions around
Yeah.
it. We knew that we wanted to incorporate experts for those because we didn't want it to be, it's just like, oh, it's of course the people who are doing the research wanted to say how important this topic is. Whereas other episodes where we wanted to dig into advice, practical examples, more like market intelligence and like conversations. We knew we could bring in commerce SMEs. We knew we could bring in their partners because they had that firsthand account from all of the work that they were doing firsthand. So we knew we wanted to do a mix, but we did want to find the right balance of internal and external people. So, the proof points were really driven home.
Awesome. Now, when you take a look back at this campaign and you look specifically at the podcast, would you say that it made the research report itself more accessible or more digestible or more discoverable? In your words, I guess, I guess the question really would be, how did the podcast series impact the research report essentially that was published?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm a firm believer that you're always going to need multiple paths for discovery. So not everyone wants to spend time combing through a 15-page research report. They're not all data nerds like I am, right? So
I certainly am
not. They prefer to listen to a podcast while they're working or while they're, working out, while they're on their commute. So I think in that regard, podcasts are always great because it makes something that feels complex or time consuming a bit easier for the people who would not otherwise consume it. And because it is conversational and like you're kind of building this candor and this relationship with the hosts and the guests, it makes it feel a bit more intimate, like you're kind of sitting in a round table or a workshop versus, reading a PDF. So I think there are several benefits there. And sometimes it's a really great path for audience acquisition and getting people to download the content itself. So if they know our show or if they discover it through a clip on Reels, right? Reels has been a fantastic lead gen tool for us because there's that for you feed. So in that regard, if people discover the clip and then they discover the podcast, we link to the research in all of our show notes, right? So that it's kind of like creating those breadcrumbs for people that wouldn't, again, otherwise end up on our site and in our resources section and downloading the research.
Yeah, it's basically supporting content for that long form. So if somebody discovers you guys through the podcast, listens to the episode, now the research report is in there in the show notes as supporting documentation. Now you're getting more downloads from that. So that's great. Now, you guys didn't just stop there, which I think is that's the key to this is you had the report, you had the podcast, they're kind of have this feedback loop where they're feeding each other, but you guys took it to the next level and you mentioned the reels here. And that's something that I want to talk about next. So you had this content from the podcast that was being fed from the report and you identified clips, you put them on reels. I think you even developed blogs and articles as well based on this content and the conversations that you were having with experts on the show. So why don't you tell us about how you took that next step, how you generated even more content, created this social ecosystem, generated buzz that drove it down the line to the longer form content and then ultimately the research report.
Yeah. Well, for the articles themselves, we had our editorial calendar in place. We had some key themes, topics, and interviews we were already doing. And it was just like a natural way to bring in our own first party research, just to elevate, our thought leadership and show, yes, we do these services too. And this isn't just us curating information. We're adding value to the conversation. So that was a good way for us to always make that call back to the report and to the resources center. And we're still doing that. by the way. And then for our social strategy, it was going into each episode. I mean, we have an incredible producer, Sarah, that sits in on every conversation. She goes through the transcripts and she's making notes as they're, having these conversations and as she's editing. And she looks for one, the big aha moment. Like if there's like a major like truth bomb moment that garners a response in the live conversation, of course, we're going to flag that. Two, if there's like a major like newsworthy moment or like a brand reference, we try to call those out.
Mm-hmm.
And then if there's a big lesson or a big takeaway, that's prime opportunity for a clip as well. So it was a matter of us just like curating those moments and figuring out how do we place these clips strategically throughout our content calendar, because we have other stuff we're promoting. We have other essays, we have events, we have print. We have like a print store that we're always trying to promote as well. So it's like about kind of staggering all of these things in a thoughtful way. And in the end, a handful of clips, we did, I think 2 per episode. So 10 clips total. If you do that 1 per week, I mean, that's, more than 2 months of promotional runway. So it was a combination of 1, identifying the right clips, and 2, building the cadence in a way that was meaningful. So that has been a fun process for us because we like to see how everybody responds to everything and which platforms perform best for us, because we're not just on Instagram, we're also on YouTube and we're on LinkedIn as well.
How would you say, when you're looking back at this, this content, obviously the purpose is to feed down the line into the research, to be used as a teaser to drive people to listen to the episodes, things like that. But would you say now, looking back, did any of this social content that you had put out there kind of take on a life of its own?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we like to look at each clip as its own piece of content. Like, even though the goal is to get people to go back to the longer form, we know that's not always the case.
Yeah.
So we like to operate as if it's its own little like micro piece of content, so to speak.
So now I'm sure everybody is wondering, as we take a look at, we talked really about everything that you guys did. And sort of how you went about in execution. Everybody is wondering how AI plays into this whole thing. Were you guys leveraging AI for any of this, as far as how you were planning and executing this campaign? And if so, where did this fit in? How did you use it as a tool during this process?
Yeah. And I mean, that's an ongoing journey for us. We're constantly testing different workflows and different tools to see where does it best serve us. Trying to think for this time around. For this particular project, we supported AI. I think clip selection was a big help. So we had a transcripting tool that, of course, is AI generated, that allowed us to operate with some speed and flexibility. And we were able to kind of feed it into our different platforms to help us select the best moments.
Sure.
And also kind of build baseline messaging, I would say, and different hooks that we could play with for social. I mean, I like to experiment with AI content creation because I like to see where it goes.
Yeah.
But more often than not, I'm probably changing 60, 70, if not more of it, 70% of it. But it's definitely a good tool for us to kind of, if anything, just rally our thoughts a little bit.
I always say that it at the very least, what it does is it just gets gears turning. It just kind of gets
or helps
you
us
out
organize.
Yeah, big time. Without it, organized thoughts.
Yep.
It's really good at that. So awesome. So I keep saying zoom out because that's the most fascinating thing to me, the overarching campaign with all of what you've done from one research report. Let's talk about the impact. So when zooming out, you're taking a look at all of these pieces, the report, the podcast, the social content, the blog post, and the articles that you guys did. When you take a look at this overarching campaign, what did success look like to you? And was it something that I don't know, maybe you had a goal ahead of time with KPIs, or was it something that you just kind of looked back on and were surprised at the success that you found?
Yeah, we knew right off the bat we had a certain number of downloads from the first report. We wanted to, at the very least, slightly exceed those expectations. But what was really big for us was just building brand awareness, credibility, and being able to turn that data into something meaningful from an editorial positioning standpoint. So the one thing we did not talk about yet that I think is still paying off for us is the earned media that we've been able to capture since rolling out the research. So the research came out end of August, and then we really started to ramp up promotion second week of September or so. And that included getting Commerce's PR team doing some outreach, pitching it a little bit. But we are still getting media mentions. We are still getting backlinks. Wow. And from really incredible sources like eMarketer, which is trusted in its own right and does its own research. So that's kind of a really nice feather in our cap, so to speak, because it shows the quality of the content and also the integrity of the data in our process too. So for us, as a media brand, that was like, check, this has been a success. But for our partners, we were able to achieve, the number of downloads, the number of ad engagements and impressions, and of course, like the visits to the research itself. We were able to really show the comprehensive experience that they were able to create for not just their current customers, because they're doing their own promotion on their side, but for the outside audience as well.
So you mentioned the earned media. Now, I don't know if I would consider that a content format, but it's definitely relevant and definitely a key piece in this campaign. I guess one of my questions was going to be, when looking at all the different content formats that you utilize to tell this story, were there any major standouts for you? Maybe it was the podcast series, maybe it was the research report itself. When you're looking back at the results here, were there any content formats that really stood out? To me, it sounds like the earned media initiative really was, because you're still getting this to this day, but I don't know, any insights there?
Yeah, I would say the earned media for sure, because it allows other people to interpret and report on the results too, which I find to be highly influential. And then also the report itself. I mean, it's always something that we can link back to. It's something we can share with our clients, our partners, our readers. And it's also, within that report itself, there are visualizations, charts, images that we can extract and put into new things as well. So I would say, those two levers have been super valuable for us. And, we try to backlink to the podcast episodes as much as we can as well. But as far as like turnkey repurpose, the research for sure is still paying dividends for us.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, everything is pointing back to it, right? So even though these content formats stand on their own, it is derivative. So it's all pointing back to that report. So that does make sense. Now, looking to the future, do you guys see yourselves, leveraging a strategy like this again in the future? Would you say that it was so successful that maybe even for next year's report, this is something that you would be leveraging moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is always the goal. We love to do year over year comparisons and benchmarks and see how the industry has evolved, how consumers have evolved. And, actually we've applied some of the same methods to a survey campaign we just did around the holiday season. It wasn't quite a copy paste. It was a 2-phased survey, actually, which was super fun. So we were able to survey consumers before they started holiday shopping, how they plan to use AI to shop, of course, again with the AI. And then
can't get away from it.
I know. And then at the end of the holiday season, it was, how did you actually use AI, and how is that going to impact your future browsing and buying behaviors. So we were able to look at that like delta, I like to
Yep.
say, because people say they're going to do something, but they actually do something completely different, and identify how that reflects the benefits of AI, the value prop, and how that connects to the psychology of how people rely on AI, whether it's, logistically, in terms of taking the mental load off of them, whether it's, for inspiration, or whether it's for like emotional clarity, right? So that added so much value because it was like baked in time to raise awareness for the research. But we didn't do a podcast series for that. We just did two different, mini reports that were web optimized, ungated. We did a final PDF report, and then we're still creating some micro content for social, including it in our newsletter and always backlinking to it. So every new project is unique, but we always try to, apply the same philosophies.
Yeah, you're really sort of juicing it for everything it's worth. That's
Yeah.
good stuff. So for marketers that may be watching this, what advice would you have if they're, planning out their content for the year? Would you recommend to them that they identify a key anchor piece of content and base their strategy around that with derivative content? Maybe it's multiple, anchors throughout the year. How would you sort of give advice to B2B marketers who are taking a look at their content throughout the year? How should they be approaching things?
Yeah. I mean, if the goal is to do research, definitely like try to figure out how you can break down that content, break down that research, and extend it for as long as you can, because it's an investment. It's a time investment. In some cases, it's a marketing investment because you're getting people to take the survey, or it's a financial investment if you're, outsourcing a panel. So either way, it's time and resources spent, and it's all connected to a much larger opportunity. If you're designing the survey the right way, you can always extract value from that. But the other thing I would add is it doesn't always need to be a huge 15, 20 question survey report. You can do a series of micro surveys throughout the year. Like it can be one or two questions, and you can do like little pulse surveys that you can share on social, or turn them into podcast clips. So just like you can take the big thing and break it down, you can take the small things and build them up over time. So don't feel like you have to do this huge endeavor and it's going to take so long and it feels overwhelming and like a burden. You can always start small.
Yeah, that's great. Now, what is in the future for Alicia Esposito? What are you excited about in 2026? What do you have next coming up on your plate? You already told us about the report you did sort of at the end of the year, post-holiday. What's coming up now in Q2?
Yeah, we have a lot of really great stuff in the works. The most recent and most exciting for our team is we have a new print zine that is just going out for pre-order called Strata. And it is a reflection of the cultural trends and aesthetics that are shaping our relationships with brands. We have been tracking all of these, social, cultural moments that are impacting how we market, how we create products, how we connect with each other. And 2025 in particular was a very interesting year for us because we saw so many conflicting trends at play. So this is a new format for us. I like to call it the like cool, edgy older sister of the trend report, because it is definitely high visual, high impact. For some people, maybe a little bit jarring, but focuses on being really easy to read, flip through. So actually, it's a riff of sorts on our multiplayer brand zine. So as you can see, very compact, soft bound, easy to travel with. Lots of, text excerpts, a lot of visuals. We even have some screenshots in here, some tweet threads, like we're all about incorporating the internet culture moments that ultimately trickle down into brand decision making. So imagine this, but to a whole other level of color and trends.
That's
so
awesome.
It's actually available for pre-order now.
All right. And where can they go to get that?
So currently we're on MetaLabel. So if you go to metalabel.com and search Strata, Strata, you will find it there. Or you can search Future Commerce Press, and that has our whole collection.
Perfect. Love that it's print. We're still doing print.
Yep.
I'm
always. We're big believers.
For that. Yep, definitely. Now, for anybody that may want to connect with you on social, where can they find you? If where are you on the soch?
Yeah, so have to say LinkedIn is definitely the top one. Just search for me, Alicia Esposito, and I'm on Instagram, Alicia Fio Espo. I'm going to be honest, X, not so much. I'm sorry, guys. Those are my top two.
Never was a big Twitter X guy myself. So awesome. Alicia, this has been a great conversation. As always, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Deb. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you got it. I'll talk to you soon. So hopefully that gave you a few ideas on how to take a single piece of content and turn it into something much, much bigger. At the end of the day, it's really about building around that one core narrative and letting that fuel everything else, instead of starting from scratch every single time. I'll have Alicia's information, the report, and a few related resources linked in the description below if you want to dig a little bit deeper. And if you've built something similar or you're thinking about it, I'd love to hear about how you're approaching it in the comments below. If you found this helpful, we'll be putting out more content like this, so be sure that you like and subscribe so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.